everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling an absolutely fascinating puzzle. Just imagine, for a second, trying to run a massive, incredibly diverse country all by yourself. I mean, every single law, every new road being built, every tax decision, every local school curriculum, it would be literally impossible, right? You'd inevitably end up in absolute administrative gridlock. You just wouldn't be able to meet the needs of the people. So to solve that, we really need to look at a concept that shapes the very foundation of how large nations operate, and honestly, how they survive. We're going to explore the critical mechanics of power sharing that keep a country from just falling apart. Okay, let's dive right into this with a sort of top-down roadmap. We're going to start with what is federalism, then move to the rules of the game, look at coming versus holding together, break down the three-list system, and finally, look at the 1992 decentralization shift.
Starting us off, Section 1. What is federalism?
I want to pose this direct question right back to you. What exactly is federalism? It's one of those words tossed around constantly, right? In civics class, on the news, in political debates. But stripping it down to its absolute core is absolutely crucial for understanding how your day-to-day life is actually governed. It's not just some dry textbook term. It's the invisible framework operating all around us. It literally decides who gets to make the rules that affect your neighborhood, your city, and your entire nation. To really wrap our heads around this, think of a massive pizza. If you try to manage an entire giant pizza by yourself without cutting it up, well, it's cumbersome, it's hard to handle, and honestly, it's just a bit of a mess. But if you divide it into perfect slices, not only is it infinitely easier to manage, but you can actually cater to different tastes. Like maybe one slice has pepperoni, while another has mushrooms. And this brilliantly illustrates the core idea. You're taking a large, unwieldy whole and dividing it up so that power and responsibility are neatly distributed to represent those unique, localized needs. So, formally speaking, federalism is a system of government where power is divided between a central authority and various constituent units. It essentially acts as the ultimate structural solution to the administrative gridlock of a massive nation. Instead of one person or just one central office in a capital city trying to handle every single local dispute, power is systematically shared. Now, depending on where you are in the world, these units might be called provinces, cantons, or as we commonly know them, states. By giving these units their own slice of power, a nation can maintain unity while still totally respecting local diversity. Moving right along to Section 2, Rules of the Game. You know, every game has rules, and federalism relies on some very specific constitutional mechanics to make sure the whole system doesn't just collapse into total chaos. There are a few key features that make a system truly federal. First up, you've got to have two or more levels or tiers of government. Usually this means a national government and a state government. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, each tier governs the exact same citizens, but they have their own separate jurisdictions. They've got their specific lanes. The central government can't just swoop in and take a state's tax revenue because they feel like it. No way. Each level has its own defined power to tax, make laws, and administer justice. Third, these powers aren't just polite suggestions or handshake agreements, they are explicitly guaranteed by a written constitution. And finally, what happens when they disagree? Because, trust me, they absolutely will. Well, that's where the courts come in. The highest courts act as the ultimate umpire. If the national and state governments get into a fight over who controls a specific resource, the courts step in, look at the constitutional rulebook, and make a binding decision. Which brings us to Section 3, Coming versus Holding Together. Now, what's really interesting about this is that not all federations around the world are built the exact same way. The actual motivations behind their creation dictate how power is distributed. On one side, we have coming together federations. This happens when previously independent states decide, hey, let's join forces to form a bigger, stronger unit. Their main motivation? Usually it's to pool their military strength and economic resources for mutual security, while still retaining a lot of their own sovereignty. A perfect historical example of this is the United States. On the flip side, we have holding together federations, and this is entirely different. This is when a massive, already existing country intentionally decides to divide its power between a national center and its states. The goal here isn't to build a new nation from scratch, but rather to accommodate vast internal diversity and keep the country from fracturing, just like India. In a holding together system, the central government generally retains just a bit more power to make sure the whole shebang stays unified. Let's zoom in a bit more with Section 4, the three-list system. So how do India's powers actually stay divided without constant everyday chaos? Well, the answer lies in a highly specific three-part system. Let's break down these three lists. First, we've got the union list. This handles items requiring absolute national uniformity. Think about defense and foreign affairs. I mean, imagine if every single state had its own military or its own foreign policy. It would be an international nightmare, right? So only the central government can make laws on these items. Next up is the state list. This one covers local nuances and day-to-day administration like the regional police force and agriculture. The agricultural needs of a state like Punjab are drastically different from those of Kerala, so it makes perfect sense that the states manage these laws themselves. And finally, we have the concurrent list. This tackles shared interests, things both levels of government care deeply about, like education. Both the center and the state can make laws regarding items on this list, but that brings up an obvious question. What happens if they clash? That's where a critical tiebreaker rule comes into play. If the center and the state disagree on a law within the concurrent list, the central law automatically overrides the state law. It's basically a built-in mechanism to prevent permanent gridlock.
And our final stop, Section 5, the 1992 decentralization shift.
Let's move down and see how this builds at the grassroots level. Decentralization. By definition, decentralization is when power is taken away from the central and state governments and handed directly to local bodies. Now, before 1992, local governments in India certainly existed, but they were, frankly, largely toothless. They didn't have real resources or guaranteed authority, and elections, well, they were often just ignored. But the landmark 1992 constitutional amendment fundamentally rewired this entire system. It shifted actual constitutional power directly to the village and town level. It formally mandated that regular elections must be held for local bodies, like gram panchayats in villages and municipalities in urban areas. This ensured that local voices could no longer just be bypassed by higher levels of government. It was a real game changer. And so, the crucial point here, and this is a staggering statistic, is that a full 1/3 of all these local government seats were constitutionally reserved for women. No way, right? This was not just administrative tinkering or, moving desks around in a government office. It was a massive, literally revolutionary step in democratic representation. By reserving these seats, the system pulled millions of women into the political fold, ensuring that the local bodies managing everyday village and city life truly reflected the demographics of the actual people they were serving. It's honestly one of the most powerful examples of using the mechanics of federalism to create real, tangible societal change. Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. We've journeyed from the massive macro view of central authorities all the way down to the local gram panchayats and municipalities that literally sweep the streets and fix the streetlights. So if these local governments hold the real day-to-day power of the people, how involved are you in yours? Seriously, think about that the next time you see local elections happening in your area. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.